we are now finally going to head just north of Toronto to listen in as Andrew Scheer delivers the third of his policy speeches, this one centered on immigration. Let's take a listen.
Around the world celebrate to this day. It is this very same spirit of freedom that Canada has always stood for. So we congratulate and join Armenians in Canada and around the world to celebrate this very special occasion. Toronto is, by any measure, a growing global metropolis. And every time I'm back in the GTA, I am struck by how fortunate we are as Canadians to welcome people who have chosen Toronto and Canada as their home. That is indeed one of the best parts of my job, and the job to which I aspire. I get to meet almost daily with inspiring and industrious people who have made brave decisions to leave their loved ones and their homelands to start a new life in a new country. They have chosen Canada. And almost to a person, newcomers to Canada and those who have come in previous generations are united by the same dreams we all share. They want a shot at full freedom and dignity, opportunity and prosperity. They want to make life better for themselves and their families. Point le plus important.
And the most important point is that they want to make a positive difference in their community and help to make Canada an even better place. That is the history of immigration in Canada, and fundamentally the history of Canada itself.
I believe Canada is the greatest country on earth. But this is no accident, nor was Canada's greatness automatically assured. It took work, hardship, sacrifice, faith, risk-taking, and the entrepreneurial spirit. If we want to understand what Canada is and what it can be, we need to understand where we have come from. From the very first Indigenous peoples to each wave of new arrivals that have come to Canada, to hopeful newcomers that are arriving even today at Pearson and other ports of entry, all are part of that shared story. And we are all part of a grand tale still being written. A success story of different people, humanity in all its diversity, each adding its own chapter. One country, the true North, strong and free. Now together, we have built Canada into greatness, despite great odds. Just think of the hardship and suffering faced by the original First Nations, or the earliest European settlers to arrive. Yet each successive wave of new arrivals not only survived, they thrived. Canada's first Indigenous peoples who established a foothold on the land and built a lasting way of life out of harsh natural environments. Les premiers Français qui ont fondé les colonies qui sont devenues des centres florissants,
that founded the colonies that became flourishing centers like Quebec City and Montreal, and the United Empire Loyalists who fled the United States and helped to build the provinces that would create our confederation. In fact, Canada has always been a place of refuge around the world. What about the people, the slaves that came through the Underground Railroad?
Ukrainians fleeing totalitarian communist regimes in Eastern Europe, or for Chinese, Tibetans, Vietnamese fleeing communism, poverty, persecution, and war. Each of these groups of new arrivals saw in Canada the chance to realize their hopes and dreams. They have helped grow this country, literally and figuratively, as have more recent arrivals, Iranians fleeing theocratic despots, Copts persecuted for their belief in Jesus Christ, Muslims afflicted by oppression and civil war, gays and lesbians escaping literal extermination simply for being who they are. And it's all because Canada is built on a rock-solid foundation of enduring values, democratic institutions, the rule of law, and fundamental and universal human rights. And we absolutely must protect these values because they are what set us apart. They allow Canada to offer what so many other countries simply cannot: the freedom to preserve and pass on their cultural traditions, and the opportunity to live in peace with those around them. And the economic freedom that so many governments around the world deny their people. And that economic freedom that ensures that hard work pays off, that gives people the ability to work towards their dreams and choose their own path in life. But with each passing day, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals undermine this proud legacy. In 4 years, they have not only undone progress the previous Conservative government made to strengthen our immigration system, to speed up processing and to eliminate backlogs, they have managed to undermine the long-standing consensus that immigration is indeed a positive thing for this country. Sadly, under Justin Trudeau, a record-high number of Canadians believe that immigration should be reduced. Worse, Canadians have lost faith in the fairness of our system. They now question the integrity of our borders, and they're less confident about newcomers' ability to integrate fully and contribute to our shared prosperity. Now, Canadians rightly expect that our immigration programs will lead to new arrivals being fully integrated into Canadian society and Canada's economy. But if that system begins to break down, as it has under Justin Trudeau, public support breaks down as well. The numbers are almost hard to believe.
Since 2017, more than 3,000 people came into Canada illegally from the United States. This is still one of the safest and freest and most prosperous countries in the world. It costs more than $2 billion for taxpayers, and that figure is going up all the time.
Most often on this point are new Canadians themselves, people who have played by the rules and arrived in Canada fair and square. They are the most offended at Trudeau's status quo, where some are able to jump queues, exploit loopholes, and skip the line. And like you, Conservatives have questioned the current government's ability to preserve the integrity of our immigration system. Now, Justin Trudeau and his ministers responded how they always do when confronted with criticism, with more rhetoric and personal attacks. In fact, even before I started speaking here, the Liberals already put out a statement on what I was going to say without having even heard it. That's what we can expect from this party in the lead up to the next election. Now, I think we can all agree that we should be able to have an immigration debate in this country without the government calling the people who criticize their failures racists and bigots. This government's approach is dangerous for two reasons. First, it reduces legitimate criticism to cheap partisanship and makes it easier for the government to ignore the very real problems in the system. And number two, and more importantly, it debases and devalues the threats that are still, unfortunately, all too real in our society. Racism is real, bigotry is real, extremism is real. And to ascribe those motives to those who simply want stronger security screening procedures or fewer people entering the country illegally makes a mockery of such hateful forces. Now, before I move on to what a new Conservative government will do to renew faith in our immigration system, I'd like to make something absolutely crystal clear. And what I'm about to say, I have said many times before. There is absolutely no room in a peaceful and free country like Canada for intolerance, racism, and extremism of any kind. And the Conservative Party of Canada will always make that absolutely clear. This goes to one of my most deeply held personal convictions. I believe that we are all children of God, and therefore there can be no inferiority amongst human beings. And that equal and infinite value exists in each and every one of us. And I find the notion that one's race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation would make anyone in any way superior or inferior to anyone else absolutely repugnant. And if there's anyone here who disagrees with that, there's the door. You're not welcome here. Now, over the last several months, Canada's Conservatives have consulted Canadians and stakeholders from all over the country as part of our Pathway to Canada tour. And I want to thank our Immigration Shadow Minister, Michelle Rempel, for all her work on these consultations. These consultations have concluded, and what we heard from Canadians and newcomers was clear. They want the immigration system to be managed competently. They want to know that every measure is being taken to ensure their safety. But most of all, they want Canada to remain a safe and welcoming place for the world's most vulnerable. We
hear concerns about the idea that the standards must be maintained for those people who want to come here legally, and adequate services for people coming into Canada.
Legitimate refugees and asylum seekers fleeing violence and persecution, and about ballooning costs to manage the ongoing situation at Canada's border with the United States. As Prime Minister, my government will restore fairness, order, and compassion to the immigration system. So allow me to expand on that for a couple of minutes, because this is personal to me. My mother, who passed away just a couple of years ago, was deeply committed to helping the vulnerable. She instilled in us, in our family, an enduring appreciation for how a commitment to social justice flows naturally from the conservative principles of individual responsibility, compassion, and common sense. My mother loved the scripture verse that goes, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." One of the last causes my mother took on before she got sick and wasn't able to be as active as she was to serve on the refugee committee at our local parish in Ottawa at the outset of the Syrian civil war. Refugees were just starting to come, and she was ready and eager to do whatever she could to help. She did what she could to help financially, but she also showed them around town, had them over for dinner, made sure they had the things they needed. My father also got involved, helping to celebrate their birthdays by bringing over cakes and gifts. It was deeply moving for me to see, as my mother received medical treatment before her death, how those same refugees visited her in the hospital to return the love and compassion that she had shown to them. And it reinforced for me how Canada must continue to be that place for those truly in need. This strikes at the very fairness of Canada's immigration system. And there is absolutely nothing fair about forcing the oppressed and the persecuted, like the Syrians my mother helped, to wait longer for Canada's help while others cross the border illegally from places like upstate New York.
Because just as we deal with people who are considered to be threats to our country, people are coming in and are able to get benefits. But many people come from Mexico to Canada because the government has introduced certain visa requirements.
About Yazidi genocide survivors, already without proper mental health treatments here in Canada, having to fight the government to be reunited with their families. This government has failed on these and so many other counts, and in doing so, has degraded Canada's standing as a place able to welcome and be safe for those in need. And friends, while history and humanity alone would be enough for Canada to uphold this proud legacy, there are frankly important and concrete economic arguments to be made as well. Like many Western countries, Canada is facing a massive demographic shift in the coming decade. As baby boomers retire, we will need workers, innovators, and risk takers to sustain a thriving economy and ensure we can maintain the high standard of living that we Canadians enjoy and rightly expect. We need the world's best and brightest to choose Canada. And we want them to integrate fully, socially and economically, to contribute, as previous generations have done, to building the Canada we know and love, and to ensure it remains the great country it always has been. When newcomers to Canada succeed, Canada succeeds. A safe, orderly, and compassionate system can ensure new arrivals make the most of their new lives in their new homeland. Such a system ensures all Canadians are better off as well. Now, Canada's Conservatives are preoccupied by jobs and the economy first and foremost, because we know that prosperity lifts everyone out of poverty, and allows everyone to have a better quality of life. So you'll hear me talking about those two topics often, because this current government ignores them. We in the Conservative Party understand that immigration done right is good for the economy, good for jobs, and good for people who have chosen to come to Canada. Now, I want to touch a little bit on immigration numbers, because I think in a lot of ways this topic has become a little bit of a red herring. There are those who say the number of immigrants in Canada that Canada admits is too high, and some have even made rash promises to reduce it without considering the economic impact. Similarly, there are those who say the number is too low and have set high targets without adequate integration services in place. In both cases, political purposes trump economic and social reality. As Prime Minister, I will set immigration levels consistent with what is in Canada's best interests. Now, that number may change every year, and I'm not going to get into a political debate, or worse, an auction about immigration numbers. The number will reflect what Canada needs, and just as importantly, who needs Canada. Now, this brings me to a few final thoughts I would like to share with you. In a few months, when our next federal election campaign begins, each party will release a platform full of ideas and options for voters to consider. And I would like to share some of those in a general way with you today. As Prime Minister, I will work to immediately restore fairness, order, and compassion in our immigration system. I will safeguard and emphasize economic immigration. I will stand up for families and ensure that spouses and children can be reunited. We will improve language training to ensure greater proficiency in English or French and newcomers' ability to succeed economically and socially. We
will deal on a priority basis with people who are truly facing danger and provide for sponsorships and restore the integrity of our system by applying the proper rules.
Our system prioritizes people facing true persecution, focus government sponsorship on the victims of the four atrocity crimes, and restore integrity to our system by supporting the consistent application of fair rules. I will improve credential recognition and make it easier for new Canadians who have existing skills that meet our standards to ply their trades here. We all lose out when doctors and engineers are not able to practice their profession. I want them to come to Canada to do what they were trained to do. And I will work to allow those who enter Canada as low-skilled workers a permanent path to residency, making sure wages are fair and worker abuse is prevented. I will work to reunite survivors of genocide who have already resettled in Canada more expeditiously. Now, as I stated earlier this month when sharing my vision for Canada's foreign policy, Conservatives will also bring back the Office of Religious Freedom so that we can protect our shared humanity and promote interest in the dignity of all people. We will work to put an end to the illegal border crossings at unofficial points of entry like Roxham Road by closing the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement that allows some people to skip the line and avoid the queue. And we will do more to promote private sponsorships of refugees. You see, nothing can compare with the love and compassion that churches, synagogues, mosques, or service clubs offer to refugees. And the evidence backs this up. The government's own data shows that even more than a decade after they arrive, privately sponsored refugees earn more and depend less on government than those who came through government sponsorship. When churches, mosques, community groups, temples, synagogues, cultural associations made up of people like my mom, when they put their own money forward and devote their own time to help a refugee family, then they are deeply invested in the success of those refugees.
When mosques and community groups and churches offer their own help to refugee families, when they are fully invested in the success of those refugees, they end up in communities that will support them. In comparison, those sponsored by the government very often find themselves in hotels.
Time and time again from private sponsors that the government is getting in their way. We hear about how costs and needless red tape are being piled onto the good work they do, and how some caps are imposed arbitrarily. We can, in fact, do more for the most vulnerable if the government gets out of the way and works to better enable and support private sponsoring organizations. Now, these are just some of the proposals we'll put forward, and others will flow in time, and we'll fill in some more details during the election campaign itself. Although in our view, there is no debating the need for real action to restore our system's integrity. Conservatives have cleaned up liberal messes in immigration before, and we are prepared to do it again, with fairness, order, and compassion as the pillar of our efforts. Now, friends, we have all seen how the Liberal leader reacts to dissent and disagreement within his ranks. He silences it. He and his party are also intolerant of and openly hostile toward the personal beliefs and convictions of millions of Canadians. There are others, too, who abuse words, devalue meaning, and silence views that don't conform to a narrow way of seeing things. That means today's Conservatives are alone being the last true big tent national party. We embrace personal freedom. We embrace the freedoms that people have when they come to Canada. I am proud to lead a party that believes that Canada's best characteristics are reinforced by the best values of new Canadians: hard work, entrepreneurship, personal industry, family, faith, religious freedom, sacrifice, risk-taking, individual freedoms, and respect for the rule of law. All of these inherently conservative principles are ones shared amongst those who have come to Canada over the course of our history. Conservative values are values shared by hundreds of thousands of newcomers who arrive in Canada each and every year. They are why so many people choose Canada. They are the ideals that make us Canadian, and ones which Conservatives place at the heart of our party. They are what Canada was built on, and what Canada stands for, what new Canadians stand for.
Conservative values are values shared by hundreds of thousands of newcomers who come to Canada every single year. And it is for those values that many people choose Canada. They are the ideals that make of us the Canadians that we are, and they are at the very heart of the Conservative Party. And they are what Canada was built on. Those are the values that Canada defends and what Canadians defend.
Justin Trudeau says that diversity is our strength. But there is more to it than that. We have to focus on why Canada is diverse. The reasons why waves and waves of immigrants from all corners of the world have come to Canada. It is because we are free to worship, and free to speak, and free to believe. It is because of our economic freedom that produces so much prosperity and opportunity. It is because we are open to the persecuted and the oppressed and the broken. It is because we are equal in opportunity and equal before the law. It is because we are all these things that we are diverse. Diversity is the result of our strength, and our strength is and always has been our freedom. And that freedom is based on the institutions and principles that we hold so dear and that we must ensure are protected. The reason why so many people from around the world are able to be treated equally, practice their faith, pass on their customs and traditions, is because ours is a society based on the equality of all human beings. of the inherent human rights that we are endowed with by our Creator, not by the government of the day. And that is safeguarded by strong democratic institutions and the rule of law. It is essential that in order to continue to be the place where people can come and add their contribution to our story as it unfolds, that we protect and promote those principles and institutions to all who choose this wonderful country. As John Diefenbaker said, I am a Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, and free to oppose what I believe wrong, and free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind. These are the things that conservatives are fighting for all together come October. So I ask for your support and pledge you mine in this important cause. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. It's been a pleasure talking to you this evening. Thank you.
If you're just tuning in, that was Conservative leader Andrew Scheer delivering a speech on immigration policy for the upcoming federal election. It's the third such policy speech. We've been broadcasting here on News Network, each of them live as they happened. I'm here with the Power Panel. They've been listening in with us. Stockwell Day, Marika Walsh, Françoise Boivin, and Omar Khan. I'm going to start with you, Françoise. First of all, thank you, everyone, for all your patience this evening. It's been a long evening. Françoise, what stood out for you?
Well, me being from Quebec, I was interested in seeing what he was saying to the province of Quebec, where the question of immigration, refugees, is at the heart of a lot of conversations. Honestly, I was able to count maybe 5 or 6 sentences addressed to Quebecers en français. It'll be interesting to see Scheer when he comes to Quebec on Thursday to announce a so-called star candidate, which everybody knows is going to be the ex-mayor of Trois-Rivières. But anyway, so I'm sorry I'm scooping Mr. Scheer. But that being said, what will he answer concerning his so-called policy? I didn't see a policy. I saw a lot of concept. Everybody can agree with a lot of the things he said, but I'm a bit insulted. And when he speaks in French, he talks solely of Mexican cartel, refugees, the illegals, and it's as if the rest, the what I call the valid immigration for economical reason that Quebec so desperately need, like so many other provinces and territories here. It's as if it was a different speech, and at the same time, well, he was not carried en français either, so good thing he didn't speak too much en français, because we would have heard mostly a translator telling us what he was saying. So not much into it. I'm a bit disappointed. I tried to stay focused the whole time, but so I started counting the words in French, and that kept it alive for me.
Stockwell, what do you think?
Well, of course, my response will sound partisan, but I think it's really difficult for anybody to have listened to that speech and find fault either with what he's saying in terms of technical planning that's going to be happening, or the very heart of the message, that we're all equal in God's eyes, that we can't and should not discriminate against others, and he gave the long and proper list of that. And then, as we thought, he talked about the priority is going to be vulnerable, people who are the most vulnerable, and then Canada's needs, which makes sense on the economic side. And he talked about the importance of linking family when it comes to immigration. The actual numbers he supported, of course, broad and generous numbers when it comes to immigration, and that will change, and it has changed. It changed under the Liberals from year to year, it changes under the Conservatives. So, broadly speaking, I would think, I try to put myself in the mind of somebody in another country listening to this speech and thinking, is Canada a welcoming place? And I can see them finding no fault with that concept that Canada is a welcoming place. So I think he hit the right tone. I think he gave the broad principles, and as elections draw closer, we'll probably see some actual numbers, but I think he's getting it about right.
On those numbers, I mean, he sort of said there are others who have come forward and said that they would reduce it, and I think there he's referencing Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, who did come out with a policy about that, and then said, as you mentioned, Stockwell, that it would change, it could change year to year, and sort of eschewed the idea of actually coming out with concrete numbers at this point. Marika, what stood out for you?
Well, it's exactly that. What stood out for me is that there wasn't a lot of meat behind what he was saying. So when he's saying he'll determine numbers based on the Canada's interest or the public interest, what does that mean, and how do you decide that is what will determine what your immigration policy actually looks like? So I think there's still a lot of TBDs in this speech, but I think overall Stockwell is right that it was a speech that really tried to strike the balance between making sure that you looked hard on immigration in the areas that you need to look hard, while at the same time making sure you're also not inflaming any bigotry or racism.
Omar?
Well, it shows you just how low the bar is today versus, say, when Stockwell Day was leading the Conservative movement. When you say, oh, well, there was no bigotry or inflammatory rhetoric in the speech, so this is a checkmark success for the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Her Majesty's loyal opposition. Look,
but didn't he have to address that? Like, that's what you were saying before, right? That would be an easy sort of criticism of them.
I'm happy he said that there is no place for racism or bigotry within the Conservative Party. I'm very happy to hear that. I assume now that he will not be going on the TV show of people like Faith Goldie or cavorting with rebel media or showing up at rallies with people where they're holding anti-Muslim signs. I'm hoping that is now the case in the future. But look, if he said it, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. One thing I would have liked to see a little bit more detail on from a policy front is with respect to helping use immigration policy to fill our skills gap. If you talk to businesses across the country and the Canada Business Council, led by Goldie Hyder, my former boss, they will say that the number one issue facing business growth in this country is a lack of an ability to attract skilled talent. There's really only two policy levers at play to address that. One is you can incentivize universities and colleges to teach programs that are in high demand. The other is we can work aggressively to try and recruit those people from overseas. He spoke to it in broad terms, but I would have liked to see a little bit more policy meat. Yeah,
he did talk about that a bit. One thing that stuck out for me that was kind of interesting was the idea of highly skilled people. So if you're coming over with I think he referenced doctors and one other profession, I can't remember, but I don't. But again, there was no detail on how that would happen.
If you're billing, it's all about expectations management, right? And media relations. If you're billing a major immigration speech and essentially you're delivering pablum, which is what we essentially got today, then fine. It may serve a certain purpose today, but eventually he's going to actually have to come out with some solid, concrete policy ideas.
Okay, I have to leave it there. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your extended stay this evening to the Power Panel. Stockwell Day, Françoise Boivin, Omar Khan, and Marika Welsh. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.